good.
Showtime.
Well, just about.
So why did you switch over to Firefox again?
Huh?
Why did you do that?
Because it's more resource frugal.
You don't like Chrome running in the background at all?
Well,
17 processes going on.
well, it doesn't work well with my office computer, and I kind of do not like to have use different browsers depending on which classroom I'm in. All right. Well, the recorder has started, so I'm gonna get started with the class. But before we actually dig into cisp440 stuff, which you guys are very interested and excited about, I'm trying to get to a website that I just got exposed to about, well, maybe an hour ago. I was in a meeting. I think to some of you it really does not matter, and to some of you, maybe it is something that is of interest. The program is called a Reading Apprenticeship project. It's mostly intended for professors, to basically teach, students, how to read. Not just reading, but how do you comprehend the material out of your textbooks, out of, and it's not limited to only computer science. So let me just kind of ask you this question, okay? Including all of your classes, not just computer science, but also your GE classes and other classes that you take here. Do you feel that you know how to read textbooks?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And is there a time where you kind of felt, well, I'm not really quite sure how to read it. I can spend the time, but I'm not getting the material. I'm not getting the material out of it.
Physics.
Physics. Okay. So there are occasions, right? There are occasions where you might run into some situation where you say, okay, I'm reading it. I'm spending time to actually read it. In fact, I can memorize all those statements, lines, paragraphs, but I'm still not being able to do the homework assignment or take a test, okay? So why do you think it happens? And I'm pretty sure it will happen to me as well. Okay, if I were to take like art classes, okay, that's going to happen to me as well. But why do you think that happens? Yep.
You can't be assigned a bad textbook.
You can be assigned a bad textbook, okay? That is true, okay? But then what do you do? Okay, so let's say you have a bad textbook.
Well, say you have a bad textbook, what do you do?
Yeah.
Then you have to find an online read or other resources.
But that's not what the instructor has assigned. So your assigned reading is in the textbook where you think it is not written the way that you like it.
Change classes.
Change classes is one, okay? But you can only change so many classes. Some classes are only offered by one single professor, and that professor chooses a book that you do not like. Yep.
Google topics.
Okay. You can. Yep.
You can find help outside the classroom.
Find help outside the classroom, or you can use techniques that are described in reading apprenticeship. So what I'm going to do, according to my dean, they have just a little bit of money stipend where I can spend some time to kind of learn about how to teach reading. Okay, I know this is not a reading class, but guess what? We still read a lot. Okay. And there's a specific way to read in a programming class that is not applicable so much in a history class, okay? For a class like this, do you think it makes a big difference whether I say all blah, 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 as opposed to some blah, 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 blah?
Oh, yeah.
Or not all versus, not any, okay? It makes a big difference, right? But in general reading, they say that you can skim over all the little words, right? Well, guess what? All is kind of a little word. Some is a little word. In some, to a certain extent, not is even a little word. Okay, but is a little word, and is a little word, or is a little word. That does not apply in a programming class or a math class. Okay, so this is just a resource. We're not going to spend too much time. I just want to bring this to your attention. The program is called Reading Apprenticeship. So if you just Google for Reading Apprenticeship, you can find some resources there. Okay. As for this class, this is what we'll do today. If there are no questions about the topics in the in exam 2, we're going to move forward and talk about a new concept, new idea. and the new topic. And if you scroll all the way down, it is talking about graphs, which is a very boring, dry, topic, just like everything else in this class. Okay? But graphs are actually not, that. It's actually very interesting. It's very useful. So the first thing we'll do is to take a look at, a graph theory, and we'll talk about, what is a graph, and then we'll go back and say, well, this is kind of dry and boring. Why do we need to know anything about graphs? Okay. So the first thing we do is we introduce what is a graph. A graph is a true tuple, and in this case, V is a set, and so is E. The set V is a set of what we call vertices, and then the set E is a set of edges. That's it. Okay. So let's take a look at what is a V. An element of V can be just about anything. It all depends on what a graph is representing. But a vertex is basically a quote-unquote connection point. Okay, it is a point on a map, essentially. Then if a vertex is a point on the map, then an element of E is basically indicating where you can go from one point. Okay, where does this point connect to? That is represented by the edges. So if there's a way to go from point A to point B, then there's an edge from A to B. A and B will be elements in V, and then AB as a two tuple will be an element in E as an element of the edge set. Are we still doing okay so far with this type of descriptions? So far what we have done is really just to use what we already understand about set theory to talk about what a graph is, which is really kind of boring. So what we will do next is to take a look at, but why is it useful? Why is a graph useful, particularly in computer science? So what we'll do is we'll look at a game of chess. Okay, this is just an example as a graph. Okay? So with this as a graph, each vertex is a unique state of the chessboard. Okay, so all the pieces. Okay, which piece is where, and who is the player? Who can make the next move? So combined, it becomes a state, and that state is a vertex. And obviously, in the game of chess, there are many states. Are we doing okay so far with that idea? What connects all of these states? What connects two states? What is an edge? What is it representing?
A line between two points or two vertices.
Exactly. That's the definition of an edge. But in this particular application, what is an edge? In other words, I have a particular configuration of a chessboard. Okay, and I don't personally play chess, so I'm just going to draw random stuff on it. Okay. And let's say player A is the person who can make the next move. Okay. So the next state, or something that can connect to A, let's say this is the other player is B. So obviously after player A makes a move, the next one is going to be player B's, right? Making any sense? But if player A makes a certain move, the board is going to change its configuration. And this is basically the same board, but with one single change of the pieces. One or two, depending on whether one piece is taking another piece or not, right? Okay? This is a vertex. This is a vertex. This is an edge. In other words, the entire game of chess can be represented as a graph. Is that okay so far? But why am I interested in that graph? Why would anyone in computer science be interested in a graph that represents, a game of chess?
Yeah. Graphs can simplify logical data structures, such as instead of having linked lists to do something, you could just have it in a graph, have the computer search for something and find it.
A linked list is an implementation method that can be used to implement, a conceptual thing like a graph. But in this case, why would anyone be interested in a chess game?
You can predict the next move.
To win, right? To win a game. Okay, so how do you win a game? So let's say you have this entire graph available to you, and you can search through the graph, with super duper algorithms. What do you want to do with that graph? What do you want to find? So let's just say this is a game between you and some other player, which can be a computer, okay? And let's say that if you win this game, you get $2 million as a prize. So now, do we have any motivation to understand graphs? Yeah. I can retire a little bit earlier, right? That's always a good idea. So how do you win a game of chess? If given that this is a graph and given that you can write algorithms, okay, to search through the graph, and we'll also say that we have a magical computer where you can do computations really, really fast. So what do you want to do with that graph?
The first thing I'm going to do is search for the quickest way to win the game.
Okay.
Safest way to win the game.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
You have to get to the end of this game before he gets the first.
Okay. Well, those are all really, really useful ideas. Okay. So out of this entire graph, now a graph is just a map. Okay. It basically says, okay, we have all of these states, and we have ways to go from one state to another state. Now, in this particular case, we start with an initial state, right? The initial state is the game board with all the pieces on it, and a particular person being the first player. Is that okay? That's the initial state, okay? No other state can go into this state because once a person makes a move, it can never go back to the original. Well, I guess suppose you can go back to the original state because you can make a move and then cancel that move by moving backwards. Okay, but that's the initial state. What other states are of importance in a game of chess? Starts with a C.
Check.
Check. Okay. All right. So we have a whole bunch of states here where player A wins. Okay. So player A, checkmates the player B. We have a whole different set of states here. And each state is basically a vertex where player B is checkmating player A. Is that making sense? Okay. As a player, let's say you're player A, okay? What do you want to do as a move? Because this one obviously has a lot of vertices a lot of edges coming out of it. Because each edge is representing one possible move on the chessboard. Okay? How do you choose which edge? How do you choose which way to come out of the initial state?
Whichever one leads fastest to A and gets farthest away from B.
Okay. So in a game of chess, the ultimate goal is to checkmate the other player, but not necessarily in the quickest manner, but in the safest manner. So you were absolutely right to say, okay, we want the most secure path to one of these states here, assuming that you are player A. Is that making any sense? Okay. So what type of algorithm, or what do you think the algorithm needs to do?
It probably needs to check some possibilities. If you make a move, what are the possible counter moves?
And then out of each counter move, what can you do to counter the counter move? And then out of each counter move, what can B do about the counter move and the counter move? And so on, right? Yep.
Before it ever decides to move, it has to check the current state of the board in its entirety.
Well, yes. You have to know where you are. You have to know which vertex you're standing on. But assuming you know which vertex you're standing on, you need to analyze, if I make this move, this is going to be the next state. In this state, if the other person makes this move, it will end up with this state here. So what you want to do is to come up with a way that the other player cannot take the graph over here, and you can take this graph, you can basically lead a way to one of these states. Okay? That is a problem that is related to graph theory. Okay? How many people in this class do not play chess at all? Okay? So this is not of any interest to you. Do you occasionally go to new places where you do not know how to get there? Okay. And how do you think GPS helps in this case? Now, when we say GPS, we are actually saying GPS plus a whole lot of stuff, okay? Because back in the good old days, which is not really that long ago, let's say 20 years ago, what does a GPS look like back in those days?
A map.
It's a big, huge device that sucks up a lot of battery juice, and the only thing it can tell you is the coordinate of where you are, right? Is that going to be very helpful when you need to get to a particular store somewhere in Sacramento? What if I give you the coordinate of that store? Would that be really helpful?
Possibly more helpful.
JavaScript map.
If you are a drone, yes, it will be helpful because you can just plot a straight line. But if you're driving on surface street, not very helpful.
A system of road maps.
Right. So when we talk about GPS these days and when we're driving, what are we actually talking about? In addition to the device that can tell you where you are at this point.
A map and routing system.
A map, okay, a map is useful. Okay, so let's add a map to a GPS. Okay, but who's gonna plan out the paths? Yep.
You have to have somebody who has a system of roads in that map by which a computer can track your progress on a route to somewhere else.
Okay, well, you're talking about a route, which is already a much more advanced concept than what we have, on hand. Because on one hand, I have a GPS. On the other hand, I have a map. Okay, so I go to the AAA and I, get a whole bunch of maps. Okay, so what else do you need that can even do a fraction of what your GPS, quote-unquote GPS, can do? Yep.
A graph of all of
Okay,
the roads.
very good. So if I am to digress a little bit to maps.google.com, and we'll say we are currently at 4700 College Oak Drive, and so, okay, so this is where we are, okay, this is the ARC campus. So when you look at this map here, can you tell me what can potentially be seen as a vertex and what can potentially be seen as an edge? Yep, go ahead.
I see listing on there for the Sienna Vista Apartments. It could be a vertex.
Okay, every intersection can be seen as a vertex. Okay.
Every road is an edge.
Well, every segment of a road connecting a intersection to the next closest intersection is an edge. In other words, if I were to point out here, this is definitely a potential vertex. Okay. The next one is going to be here. Okay, I know it's really hard for you guys to see because the contrast is kind of not so good on screen. This is going to be the next one. So even though there's a very short distance between this intersection, which is a T intersection, and the next T intersection, there's a really short edge connecting these two vertices. The next one is going to be here. Okay? So I can look at a map and say, well, we can convert every single intersection into a vertex, and we'll connect all the vertices by edges. Okay, so each edge is only responsible to take you from one vertex or one intersection to the next closest intersection. Why would that be useful to me? If I want to navigate from ARC to the Costco, on Auburn, okay, what is that problem transforming into? We have a graph, right? We have a graph that has vertices and also edges, okay? So if I want to go from here to the Costco on Auburn, what am I really looking for?
The vertex that is closest to Costco.
We're looking for a vertex that represents Costco, but what am I really looking for now that I know I want to go to Costco? Not the address, but how to drive there, right? How to get there. Edges. All the edges that will connect all the points from here all the way to Costco. Is that a useful application of graphs?
Sure.
Okay. Now, on the other hand, in this particular case, am I only interested in is Costco reachable? In other words, is there at least one way to go to Costco, or is there something else that I'm also interested in?
The shortest distance.
The shortest time. Okay, the shortest time or shortest cost. Okay, depending on whether time or fuel or some other things, you have to combine all of those things to a single cost. But you can associate a function to each edge that maps each edge to a cost. So when you plan your route, you can basically say, give me the most inexpensive route. Now, it depends on whether your time is important, because if time is not important, you can choose a route that will take you more time, but it may save you fuel. Okay, if you drive an electric vehicle, okay, sometimes the shortest route or the cheapest route may not be the shortest in time, but it can save you, in terms of fuel or energy use. Is that okay so far? And that problem has been kind of solved. Okay, it can never be solved completely, but it's kind of solved. Okay, because if you use Google navigation, it will tell you the best way to go to a certain place, assuming that you want the shortest route, or the route that will take the shortest amount of time or the shortest in distance. Yep, go ahead.
What do you mean that it can never be solved?
Well, it's never solved completely because it is an NP-complete problem. Okay, so let's digress a little bit to NP-complete problem. How do you know whether a path is the quote-unquote shortest from here to Costco? Well, first of all, how many paths or how many ways do you think I can drive from ARC to Costco? If I pay you 5 cents for each different route, okay, they can have common points to, but it has to be different by some way. Okay, if I pay you 5 cents, which gives you some incentive to find alternative routes to Costco, how many routes do you think you can find?
There are a few million.
Lots, right? You can go all the way to San Francisco, to San Jose, to Stockton. You can take a really big roundabout way, and guess what? It's still a different route compared to another one. Okay. So, but is that route interesting to me? And is it of any interest for me to find that roundabout way to get back to Costco?
I doubt it.
No, not really interesting, right? But how do you know that's not your shortest route? Because you find a shorter route. A shorter route, exactly. Okay. So once we find all the shorter routes, how do you know whether there's not a route that is even shorter than that? Don't you need to know at least most of the routes and the cost of all of those routes to find the shortest one? Does that make any sense? That becomes a NP-complete problem, because there's no quick and easy way to find the shortest route unless you know all the actual routes and be able to compare the cost of each one, and and therefore you can find the shortest one. Am I making any sense? Now, in the case of a map, it's intuitive, right? In other words, if I'm here, this is ARC, this is Costco, okay? If I go all the way down here, I'm pretty sure I cannot find a route that is shorter than this particular route to Costco. So I can stop right here and say, that cannot be any shorter. But when you look at the general graph, can you apply that heuristic? Can you apply that general rule of thumb and say, I think I can stop here? You cannot, especially when there are edges that might have a negative cost to it. In other words, it's not adding to the overall cost, it is actually reducing the overall cost. Then you have a really, really hard problem, because you can go all the way and have the cost increasing to a very large amount. But because you don't know whether that route will encounter a negative edge or an edge with a negative cost, to really shorten or to reduce the cost, you cannot just stop and say, hey, my shortest route only cost me X amount, and this is when it's already costing me Y, which is more than X. You cannot stop because of that reason. Am I making any sense?
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
How can the cost be negative?
A cost can be negative, when you, okay, I can give you an example, okay? If you're talking about energy use of a car, of a vehicle, okay? And you have an electric car, when it goes downhill, the cost is negative because you're using regenerative braking. So that's potentially one reason why it is quote unquote negative. Or if you drive during the day and you have a solar panel on the car, then getting stuck in quote-unquote traffic jam is a negative cost. Because that gives you time to recharge your battery. And if in the end is how much energy you have to expend, not counting the solar charging and stuff like that, then getting stuck in traffic, it has a negative cost. You would want to find the slowest route to the destination so you can charge on your way to the destination. Is that making any sense? Okay. Now, I'm making some kind of unreasonable assumptions here, but there are cases like that in real life where the cost of an edge is negative. So you cannot stop just because with this route here at this point it is costing more than another known route to the destination. You cannot stop because of that, and because you cannot stop because of that reason, you really have to know every single possible way to go from point A to point B in order to evaluate which one is quote-unquote the shortest. Am I making any sense so far? Sort of? Okay. So when you think about it, if I have, let's say, n vertices, okay, so we're talking about the set of V, the cardinality of V is, let's say, n, okay? What is the worst case of E? In other words, how many edges let's say we cannot have a route going to itself, so you cannot have an edge leading from one vertex back to itself. Okay, so a vertex can only take you to another vertex. What is the worst case of E?
N divided by 2 rounded up.
Not quite. Okay, so let's take a look at 2 vertices. Well, that's easy. That's the only thing, right? 3 vertices. How about 4 vertices? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. What about 5 vertices? If I want every single vertex to be connected to every other vertex, this one looks like a star, right? And how many vertices do we have here? We have 10 vertices. Okay. So what do you think is E in this particular case? We're saying vertices are not even directed. There's no direction.
N minus 1 over 2.
Yep. Which is proportional to n squared. Okay. All right. So given this, how can I figure out the number of routes, possible routes going from one vertex to another vertex?
We can calculate based on the number of vertices.
Since we're talking about graphs, the screensaver decides to kind of jive with what we are talking about and kind of illustrate how to travel in a graph.
We take the number of vertices and we apply the formula for as you see there, and that tells you how many edges you have.
Okay, well, let's take this one in consideration, okay? So we are starting out with, let's say, vertex A, B, C, D, and E, okay? And let's say we are going from A to, I don't know, D eventually, okay? So how many ways can I get there? Well, what about the second choice here? How many choices do I have for the second vertex?
You could go to B, you could go to E, or you could go to C.
Yep, how about the third vertex?
You could go to one minus whichever one I just meant that you take out, and then you can go to the other 2.
So if the rule is you cannot revisit one of the vertices, then the number of paths to go from one place to another place is n factorial. Okay? And what is the one thing that we have learned about factorial? How fast does it grow? If you compare n factorial to, let's say, 2 to the power of n, which one grows faster?
2 to the n grows faster.
No, it's n factorial. N factorial actually grows faster than anything to the power of n. Okay?
The tower function grows faster than n factorial, doesn't it?
Which one?
N to the n.
Nope, that is still slower than n factorial. N factorial grows faster than any power function. If you have any base, I don't care what base you have chosen. So let's say k is the base. K to the power of n, if you look at the big O notation, this is always less than the big O of n factorial. N factorial grows faster. Okay? All right. So given this particular situation where you have to find the shortest route and you can only visit one point, exactly one time, okay? That's a particular name for this problem. It's called the traveling salesman problem. The traveling salesman problem basically says you are a salesman, you can only visit one city exactly once. You don't want to go back to revisit a city. So the question is, how do you find the shortest route? Okay, how do you find the shortest way to traverse all the cities? And the number of routes available is going to be n factorial, assuming that you have n vertices. Okay? Now, why do we call that an NP complete problem? Now, this is a little bit out of the the scope of what I want to go through today. But if you look up NP complete, it's Wikipedia obviously has a huge page about this. Just from the thumbnail, you can see this is a pretty big page. But what it is a problem is called NP complete when it is a difficult problem to solve. Okay, it is proven to be equivalent to a really hard problem to solve. In other words, NP complete describes a whole class of problems that are difficult to solve. What kind of problems are we talking about? Something that is irrelevant to computer science, like the traveling salesman problem? No. If you look at the optimization of the use of registers in the processor from the compiler's perspective, it is NP complete as well. Okay. How many people have taken CISP 310 or an equivalent class so you know a little bit about assembly language programming? So when you do assembly language programming, which one is faster, accessing a register or accessing memory? Registers. And how much faster are we talking about? A lot, okay, by an order of magnitude at least, okay, 10 times. Okay, so you want to keep all the partially calculated results in register as much as you want. But how many registers do you have compared to how much RAM, how much memory you have access to with any type of architecture? Very little versus a lot, right? So you cannot fit everything into registers. Now the question is, how do you prioritize and say, well, I need to use this more often, so I'm going to keep that in a register. This, on the other hand, I only need to access it like 4 times during the entire execution of the program. So it's okay to store that into even a hard drive because in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to take up that much time. So how do you prioritize what to keep in registers and what do you keep in memory and what do you keep even on the hard drive because it doesn't really matter? Doesn't that sound like an optimization problem? A shortest route sort of problem? Because you're evaluating all the different alternatives. You're saying, okay, let's consider this option. We'll keep this and this and this in registers and we'll use memory for everything else. Okay, so you come up with the cost of that particular assignment to what you want to store in the registers. And then you look at an alternative and say, okay, this time we'll store this, this, and this in registers and everything else in memory. And then you look at all the alternatives and you say, okay, we'll pick the one that is the least costly to me. That is an optimization problem. Yep.
Wouldn't that slow processors down? Like how do processors prioritize like that?
A compiler does. So what the compiler does is it analyzes how you use your local variables. Okay, assuming you guys know you do not want to use global variables. Okay, so assuming you're dealing with local variables and you're dealing with a well-behaving programming language, which C and C++ are not. Okay, so you can do some optimization. You can look at how a variable is being used throughout a subroutine, and you say this one is used very often. Okay, it's used in a loop, and the loop is very tight, so we're going to access it very frequently. So maybe it makes sense to make this variable live in a register instead of living on the stack. Okay.
So it's not done at runtime.
It's not done at runtime. It is done at compile time. Okay. But just doing that is what we call NP complete because it's an optimization problem. Okay. Let me throw another problem at you, and let's see if you can come up with an answer. What is hyperthreading? Can someone explain the quote-unquote Intel hyperthreading technology to me? Yep.
It kind of divides processes between a virtual core and a physical core.
Yep. Yep. It's the pretense of having another core when you really do not. Okay? Well, that technology is only helpful because we have multiple ALUs per core. Okay, what is an ALU? Come on, people who have taken cisp440, explain to me what is an ALU. And you can look it up on your computer right away. Yep. It's an arithmetic logic unit. Why is that important? What would be a processor be without a single ALU?
Fundamental.
It's a heater, right? Yeah, because the ALU is the only one thing that does processing. If you want to add two numbers, it goes through the ALU. If you want to compare two numbers, it goes through the ALU. Okay? So just about any type of actual critical processing has to go through the ALU. How many ALUs is in a theoretical processor? Well, how many do you need? You just need one, okay? So in my cisp440 class, we have a little toy architecture where there's only one single ALU. So all the processing has to funnel through that one single thing. What about the Intel processor? What do you think a current generation i5, i7 processor has in per core? How many ALUs are there per core? I don't know the exact number. I'm hoping that some of you who is about to buy a processor to upgrade your own PC would know that. Let's say 6, okay, which is a fairly conservative number, okay? So let's say you have 6 integer ALUs per core, which means you can actually carry out 6 calculations all at the same time, which is great. Now the next question is, can you keep all the ALUs busy?
Wouldn't that depend on the program?
Ah, that's a good point. So now I want you to write programs in assembly so that you can control the ordering of the instructions, so that you can try to schedule the instructions, so that you can parallelize the calculations as much as you can. How many people want to do it that way?
It probably takes a lot of time.
Instead of writing programs in C and C++, I want you to write it in assembly code. And we are not going after correctness. We are actually trying to optimize the scheduling of the instructions so that you are trying to start to use all the ALUs and try to make the most out of these ALUs. That's a tough problem.
Take a heck of a lot of optimization just to figure it out.
Yep, it does, okay? Because it is an optimization problem. Because given a particular C and C++ program, by analyzing the assignment statements, the comparisons, and all of the other things that you have to do, the compiler actually has a pretty good idea that, oh, I can do this at the same time when I'm doing this, when it's at the same time that I'm doing this, and so on, because I don't need the result of this until here. So it can be done anytime between here and here. So that gives the compiler options, not a single option, but many, many options. Because of all of these operations, the compiler can now say, oh, if I schedule A, B, C, D the way it is, that is A, B, C, D, it's going to cost me this much time because of the scheduling of all the ALUs available in a core. If I schedule it as A, B, D, C, it's going to cost me this much time. If I schedule it as B, A, C, D, it's going to cost me this much time, and so on. Does that resemble a problem that we were visiting a little bit earlier? The traveling salesman problem. Okay? And it is a tough problem to solve when you are not just dealing with A, B, C, D. What if there are 20 operations that can be done in parallel? Then you have 20 factorial ways to schedule all of those operations. You have to calculate how much time it's going to cost for each sequence and figure out the one that will work the best. That's optimization. If your C compiler can do true optimization by scheduling these things to make the best use of the ALUs, you will start GCC and then you won't get the executable the next day. Maybe the next week, okay? But your program will be truly optimized, okay? And this is a problem that is fairly recent, okay? When was the last time, or when was the decade where we started to have multiple ALUs on desktop computers? The 486, the Pentium processor, I think that's the beginning, that's the starting point. That's not very long ago, okay? Now let's make this problem even worse, okay? Because what we have just talked about, what I have just described, is one single program that you are writing, okay? And I'm trying to make the most use out of the ALUs, out of the cores of your processor. What about you're running two programs and they have nothing to do with each other?
Unless you separate the cores, there's no guarantee that anything's going to run smoothly at all.
So you have two threads, okay, in terms of programming or operating system concepts. Now you have two threads, okay, you have one thread here, you have one thread here. This thread and this thread are not even coming from the same program. So the compiler cannot do a single thing about it because the compiler only knows about one thread at a time. It doesn't know how the two threads may interact.
Doesn't that cause like interrupts and things within programs?
Well, you can have interrupts and stuff like that, of the computer. But what is Intel's unique problem in this case? Intel makes the i5, i7 processor, and it's basically saying, well, with most compilers, most executables are not really that optimized. In other words, out of the 6 ALUs, okay, hypothetically speaking, out of the 6 ALUs, maybe on the average we're using 2 in parallel at the most, okay? Well, that means the other 4 are just sitting around idling, doing absolutely nothing, like our screensaver, right? So Intel looks at this and go like, well, maybe I can have a better idea. We'll analyze the interaction or the demand of the threads dynamically during runtime. And then we'll say, hey, if this is only using 2 of the 6 cores of a processor, the hyper-threading technology is basically a pretense that you have another core that will try to use the other 4 ALUs that are not in use in the same physical core. Are we still doing okay so far with that concept? So hyper-threading is a basically on-demand, runtime, dynamic way to try to optimize the use of ALUs when you only have unrelated threads executing. Are we still doing okay so far with this? Who has put together a computer in the last, 6 months or so, or at least have to come across the idea of, well, should I choose an i5 processor that has quad core but no hyper-threading, or should I pay the extra money to get the i7 processor, which has pretty much the same hardware but with hyper-threading, but it's going to cost me, $50 more. Yep.
Like $100 more, but
is it $100 more?
At least.
Okay. So how much performance are you squeezing out of that $100?
not very much. Price per performance, an i5 is significantly better than an i7. Not very many programs are multi-threaded unless you start talking about video editing, photo processing. Like 3 video games that have been released on the market in the past 2 years. Because the real thing that's new in like gaming, which is what most people would buy, they offload most of the processing to the GPU anyways. Like for most newer games, audio, like physics, and obviously the frames and stuff are all handled by the GPU. Your CPU just handles like all the data crunching that the game needs. And that's
True. Yep. But not if you're trying to recompile the Linux kernel. Then you have to use a lot of CPU time. Your GPU is not going to be helpful in that case.
In more broader aspects, if you're doing things like kernel compiling or large file editing, video editing, or anything like that, then a multi-core hyper-threaded processor is far and wide better than anything else you can get. Period.
Okay. So that's a good point. But getting back to the hyper-threading technology, it's an optimization problem, but it is a runtime, on-demand type of optimization problem. It's looking at the threads that your operating system has to run, and during runtime, it looks at the pipe of all the instructions that has to be executed, and at runtime, dynamically, the processor. This is not the operating system. This is the processor looking at the incoming stream of instructions and say, okay, let me see how I can schedule the allocation of the ALUs to make the most out of the ALUs of a single core. That is hyper-threading. And according to Intel, you can gain about 15 to 30% of performance by having hyper-threading as opposed to not having hyper-threading. Okay? But that depends heavily on what type of threads you're executing, Because if you already have a thread that is well optimized to use as many cores as possible, the chances of hyperthreading being able to schedule even more stuff to keep all the ALUs busy is slim. Am I making any sense? On the other hand, if you have an unoptimized program and it's using the ALUs really sparsely, then that you stand a pretty good chance of benefiting from the hyperthreading technology because you're only keeping 1 or 2 out of the 6 ALUs busy, and the processor with hyperthreading technology now has a chance to schedule more stuff to do during runtime. But that is a runtime issue while your program is executing. Okay? So the processor actually has to do the traveling salesman problem type of optimization, but when it is executing instructions. So that's a fairly difficult problem to deal with. Yep.
It's well, this is old. This is when Sandy Bridge was current, so like about 4 or 5 years ago. It's 4 per core for an i7. 4 ALUs per core. In Haswell, it's still 4, but they're split up differently.
Okay, so right here it says Sandy Beach Bridge has 3 ALUs per core. Not 6, but pretty sure the number can change over time.
Well, the other thing with ALU, with the way that an Intel processor handles things also depends on like what operating system you're using and how it assigns priority to those things to be executed as well.
Okay.
So there's that.
Is that?
Does that have to use AOLs to do the dynamic, to be able to find out how to optimize it?
No, the ALU is not involved in the optimization itself. The optimization is done by basically another chunk of circuit. And according to Intel, it only adds to about 10% of the die area. So it's not a huge expense in terms of increasing the size of the die when you go from non-hyperthreading to hyperthreading processors. But the gain is also kind of marginal. It's only going from 15 to 30%. Okay? All right, so getting back to the traveling salesman problem. The traveling salesman problem is a difficult problem. Okay, think about UPS. Okay, how many stops a UPS truck has to stop on a daily basis? So you load up a truck, okay, how many stops do you think a typical brown truck has to make, on each trip, okay? Well, just give me an order of magnitude. 50, 100?
I'd probably say like in between 100 and 1,000. 10 squared and 10 to the third.
I said I'd be surprised if it was anything less than 100.
Okay, so let's say it's 100, okay, which doesn't sound like a really big number, right? So what I'm going to do is to bring out a spreadsheet. It's a big calculator, right? And we're not going to recover anything. So, all right, so we'll go ahead and open up a spreadsheet. And all I want to do is to figure out, okay, what is the factorial of 100? Is that a big number? No, it doesn't look like a big number to me. It's 9.33 plus 157. How can that be a big number? Well, it's a pretty big number. I mean, I'm pretty sure you guys know how to read scientific notation, right? That's a huge number, okay? So if you are to apply the same type of optimization technique with a UPS, brown truck, you will never get your packages. Because your UPS will still be running the optimization algorithm to schedule a job from 50 years ago. Is that making any sense? So that's a tough problem, okay? It's a tough problem, but why is it called NP complete? Okay, does anyone know what the N or the P means in NP complete? Not possible.
Doesn't it also
No. Well, it's a non-something. Yep.
Doesn't it also mean it's a hard problem to even prove you have the correct answer?
No.
Answer is also a difficult problem?
No. NP complete is easy to verify. Okay, the time to verify for verification is reasonable. The N is non-deterministic, and the P is polynomial. Okay, so together NP means non-deterministic polynomial time algorithm. But what does that mean? What does non-deterministic mean? It has nothing to do with quantum stuff. Okay, in this case, it has to do with
time.
Input.
Okay, think about a single core versus multi-core, okay? So when you have a new modern processor, you have a quad-core processor. You can do 4 things at once. In other words, in the path planning type of algorithm, you can say, hey, core number 1, I want you to explore this particular path and tell me how long it's going to take. Core 2, take this path. Core 3, take this path. And core 4, take that path. When all 4 of those are done, you can now compare the cost of each one and find the optimal path. Is that okay so far? Okay? But 4 is not a very big number compared to that. Does that make any sense? So NP means, the end of NP complete means we have an unlimited number of cores. Every time you want to explore a new path and calculate the cost of that path, you can spin up, you can spawn a new core anytime you want to. That's what the N means. The P means of that one core that you can freely spawn, it will still take a polynomial time in order to get this job done. Is that okay? And in this case, it will be polynomial time to the number of destinations. So that means if you have n destinations, okay, if you have n vertices and you want to find the best way to traverse all the vertices, with a deterministic machine, you have a big O of n factorial algorithm because you have to explore every single one to figure out which one is the shortest. So this is for a deterministic machine. For a non-deterministic machine, it becomes big O of n to the power of something. K is a constant. Okay? And that's a big change in terms of the complexity of the algorithm. Because n factorial grows a lot faster than n to the power of anything. And that's NP complete. The n is non-deterministic, which means you can start off new parallel execution threads anytime you need to, and they are all truly in parallel. And the P is polynomial time, which means if you look at each single thread for each single core, the amount of time it takes to complete the job is a polynomial time type of job. And the complete means it is an entire class of problems, which means if you take any problem out of the NP complete class, there is a way to inexpensively transform one problem to another problem. Why do you want to know about NP complete? Because it just sounds good. No, because you want to keep your job in the future. Now, how can this make a difference? Comes the time when you might get fired because you wrote an algorithm, and your boss says, hey, how come it takes 43 days to find the most optimal way to do a certain thing? And your boss is just about to fire you. So what do? You prove that your problem is NP complete. I'm not kidding, okay? You prove that your problem is NP complete. How is that going to help you?
It means that it won't make a mistake.
No, it means that it belongs in a class of problems where computer scientists have been trying to solve with efficient ways, and nobody has ever come up with a way that is fast. So the chances of your boss firing you and finding another employee to get the job done, the chances of that person being able to come up with something faster is almost nothing new. And that's how you can convince your boss to keep you. Because no one else can solve that problem with any higher efficiency. Is that making any sense? No, not really. Well, just kind of write it down when you are about to get fired. Just kind of go through the list of all the things that you might be able to use to keep your job. And this is one of those things. Any questions about it? So what we have done is actually jumping through some of the stuff that I was planning to do today. We kind of skip all that stuff to talk about, in general, what is graph theory. It has to do with, algorithms that work on graphs. Okay, and the graph is basically what we have just kind of talked about. The boring stuff here, the vertices, the edges, the set and stuff like that. That is what a graph is. Okay. Are there any questions at this point about what a graph is, what is a vertex, and what is an edge? questions? Okay. Before this class, I was about to look into cryptography and try to come up with the notes to explain how cryptography is related to graph theory, but I ran out of time because I have a meeting to go to. So I'm going to continue to work on that, but at this point, it suffices to say that for anyone here who wants to get into cryptography, you really need to understand graph theory because these two fields are closely related. But why do you want to know anything about cryptography?
Security.
Security, but why do we care about security?
Privacy.
Privacy and, well, privacy is your own thing, right? I mean, you're responsible for your own privacy, but why do you think you need to know cryptography for employment purposes? If you're a top-notch cryptographer, okay, why would you think that you have a good chance of getting a well-paying job?
Because everybody needs someone that can keep them from being hacked.
And hacking, one type of hacking is attacking cryptography itself, and that's a hard science. That's basically math. Okay.
How much do they get paid? How much do they get paid?
Probably to the point that they will make sure that you cannot leave the country. Because if you are the author or the inventor of a really good cryptography mechanism, or you might be on your way to break a particular cryptography type of scheme, you're not going to leave the country.
You're not going to want to be public about it either.
But that's how you get recognized though.
Well, it's all gray hat stuff. Nothing that you would ever want to be involved in if you want to have a safe life.
Well, cryptography. So we'll just look at that word because I think it is increasingly important. Not that it was not important before. Okay, does anyone recognize what this thing is?
Looks like is it the
It's
cipher
not
machine or whatever.
It's not the Enigma, but it is another cipher.
That's the cipher machine that they use that Enigma cracked, isn't it?
It's not. This is not the. What is the name of Enigma? This is not the Enigma encryption machine.
This is a cipher.
It's a cipher machine, right?
Yeah, it's the one that creates the code that Enigma cracked.
No, the Enigma is the typewriter thing that encrypts the messages.
Oh.
The computer that cracked the encrypted messages is the Colossus. Yep. And who is the person behind all that cryptography stuff to figure out how to break the encryption? You guys only remember the name of the movie and the name of the actor, but not really the name of the historical person who's responsible for everything. He is the father of computer science.
Talking about Alan Turing?
Alan Turing, exactly. Okay. So cryptography has been around for a long time, and it has a very close relationship with mathematics and guess what? Graph theory. It's all based on all that stuff.
Cryptography might as well be a branch of mathematics.
Yep. But graph theory is not the simple stuff. The last time I took a graph, the only time and last time I took a graph theory class where the entire class talks about nothing but graphs was a graduate level class at UC Davis. So they don't even touch that stuff in undergraduate study. Now we are talking about proving theorems and other stuff with graph theory instead of just introducing the concepts, the terms, and stuff like that. So it's a little bit different. But if you want to take a graph theory class, it's a graduate level class. It's not even upper division in undergraduate. But you definitely have a good chance of finding a good job if you're good at that stuff. The RSA, the NSA, encoding stuff.
Kaspersky, Bitdefender.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a bunch.
In fact, for those of you who are really interested and you say, I cannot wait, I really want to do that stuff, hey, go to Coursera and take that class online. At least you will get a general idea of what it is and why it is important, okay? And I know, about 70% of this class says, but I just want to know how to write a game. I don't want to deal with all this math stuff here. Do you think games have anything to do with cryptography?
Actually, yeah.
And why so?
For one thing, you need to keep the data on the
game disk itself safe such that other people can't rip it off and resell it.
Okay, so you're talking about copy protection, okay,
Yeah.
which has existed since the Apple II days. Okay, in those days, people actually used lasers to burn holes on the floppy disk, so that that part cannot be magnetically reproduced or duplicated. So that's definitely one thing. Okay, what about during a gameplay? When you have a multiplayer game that's networked, what do you think cryptography has anything to do with it?
Point-to-point security.
Point-to-point security, yeah,
Well,
that's
end-to-end. Sorry, end-to-end.
end-to-end security. But why do you need that?
Sessions.
Because if someone was sitting in the middle, we're talking about man-in-the-middle attacks. If someone was
Okay.
sitting in the middle of the two communication
Right.
links, then they could grab and decode, or if it's not encrypted, they just grab the information, and they could get access to your computer, the other side.
Yeah, but we're talking about a game, where you're making a move and say, I want to make this move with this champion in League of Legends. That's not.
They can
really,
stop you from doing
It's
it.
not high sensitivity stuff.
Well, then
and
they
you
can just stop you from doing it. I mean,
Okay, what about this? What about, you are about to crack the communication protocol of League of Legends, and you are going to write a bot to play the games for you.
you're talking about like things like Punk Buster and stuff like that stop cheating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why cryptography is important to Riot, okay, the publisher of the game, because they don't want people to start to write bots and say, I cannot have this kind of reaction time, but I can write a program that has super duper reaction time and perfect aiming for every single thing. I can even optimize and say, well, if I shoot slightly to the left, I have this much chance to hit more of the minions, right? So Riot doesn't want that, so that's why it wants to use cryptography to make sure that you cannot write a program to directly inject commands into the game and say, well, instead of me playing the game, I'm just sitting back and watch my program playing the game. Okay, and that's nothing new. Since we have network games, this has always been an issue. Okay, having bots to play the games for people. Yep.
But a lot of that has to do with client-side security, really, and protections that are installed on the client when you install the game. Like, yeah, there is some like end-to-end security to keep that stuff from happening, but a lot of bots are written to do memory scraping, which is almost undetectable by most things. So they look for like common stuff, like keyboard inputs that are faster than they normally would be and stuff.
Yeah,
like
but your
that.
keyboard cannot see what the screen is displaying. See?
True.
Yep. All right. What else? What else do you think is important with cryptography? Banking, obviously. Okay.
Health information systems.
Yeah, those are protected.
What if someone finds a way to realistically crack, the most secure encryption that we have today, and they can do it with, like not minimum, but they can do it with reasonable computation power? That's going to change a lot of things.
And that's not far away.
And do you think that's going to happen?
Oh, I'm sure it already is.
There's no such thing as a completely secure algorithm. Like-
Yeah, nothing's perfect.
Okay, what is WEP? W-E-P. Do you guys do remember WEP?
Yeah.
When you were little kids, your parents would set up a Wi-Fi router, and they would use WEP, W-E-P, which stands for Wired Equivalent Protect Privacy. Okay, and why don't we use WEP these days? 128-bit,
Because it was been cracked.
because it can be hacked. Okay, and so we have to use what? WPS,
WPA,
PSK.
Yeah.
Yep. So that changes because of the amount of processing power we have. Okay, without the processing power that we have today, some of the encryption scheme will still be okay, but because we have more and more processing power, some of the encryption scheme from before with 128-bit encryption is not sufficient. Yep.
Does cryptography have any non-security applications?
Possibly, but I think that's where the money is.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's where the money is. Yep, go ahead.
Well, as we get more processing power, like it's kind of a twofold problem. On one side, yes, you can make encryption algorithms that are faster and able to encrypt things to a deeper level. But on the other side, that means that your quote unquote enemy has the ability to do this, to decrypt it. with similar processing power.
Because what you're doing is you're discovering a new material, but you can use that material to make the spear and also the shield.
Right.
So it doesn't really help in terms of, can I make a shield that can withstand the spear, because they can now both be made out of the same material. Wolverine versus Captain America. Yep. Best way to describe it. Yep.
Well, mainly, I think it's like they all know that like all encryption algorithms are eventually gonna get cracked. It's just that like
It's just a matter of time.
They want
Exactly.
to make one that, like that's like reasonably secure, like
Yep.
for the foreseeable like next 10 years.
Yep.
Kind of thing.
That's exactly the thing. How many people watched the Imitation Game? Well, I haven't watched it, so I cannot complain. Okay, but that really is the movie to watch because it gives you a historical background of who Alan Turing was and what he did. Okay, so originally, what was that scene about? All of those people in a room, and they have like huge pieces of paper, and they were doing something on the paper. What were they doing?
Writing down code.
Come on. Those of you who watched the movie, they were decoding. They were cracking the encryption by hand. Okay, so Alan Turing found a way to crack the encryption by hand. Initially, because it's possible, because the Enigma machine only had 4 disks out of 5, and it was possible to do it by hand. Okay, in a timely fashion, where by the time you crack the encryption of a transmission, the mission has not started yet. So the information is still usable. It's still it's still valuable. Okay. What happened at the later part of World War II? What did the Germans do to the Enigma machine? They added another disk. Okay, by adding another disk, they made the problem much more complicated. It can still be done by hand, but it will take a much longer amount of time to do it. So the question is not whether it can be done, it is how quickly can it be done. Can it be done before the military campaign or action is performed? So that's why they came up with a computer, the first digital computer, to break the encryption, because that's the only way they can break the encryption in time before anything happens. And they were able to do it so reliably with such efficiency. Sometimes, not a lot of times, but sometimes they can receive the original German message, decrypt it, and read the message. So you can see a whole bunch of British intelligence people reading a decrypted German message. And then here comes the reply from the other side of the German communication line saying, I did not catch the entire message. Can you retransmit? But the British is already reading the original message and go like, well, we got it, no problem. Then they will just have to watch the retransmission of the same thing. So that's all kind of useful stuff. When you look at how many people know what is a finite state machine, since we're talking about Alan Turing? Nobody. Okay. A finite state machine, which is a FSM, which has nothing to do with the flying spaghetti monster, which is also FSM, is basically a theorized version of a computer. Okay? So how would you model a computer?
How would I model a computer?
How would you model a theoretical computer and say, well, I think all computers, these problems cannot be solved by any computer. I don't care how much RAM, how much processing power, what technology, it cannot be solved. How do you come up with a theory like that by modeling a computer?
Where do we start?
Where do we start? Exactly. Okay, so a finite state machine looks like this. Okay, so this is definitely, it's related to graph theory, okay, because once I draw the picture, you will see why it is related. A finite state machine has states, and each state is basically a bubble, okay? You have an initial state, and you have a final state. So I think the final state always looks like this. The initial state is a solid circle like that, okay? So you have to start here. Then you have some of, in this particular case, we have 2 other states. So what happens with a theoretical machine, which is also called a finite state machine, is in order to go from one state to another state, you have to look at the input, which is represented by a symbol, okay? So you can say, oh, I can go from this state to the other state if the input is an A, lowercase a in this case. Okay. Now, with each transition, you can also say, oh, I want to emit W as an output. And from this state, you can go to another state and say, if the input is, I don't know, K, we will emit a symbol called R, doesn't matter. And you can have loops too. Okay, so this is kind of unique because in a lot of graphs, you don't want to have loops. So in a finite state machine, you can do that. Okay, so this means when you're in this state and the input is, let's say, a B, and there's no output in this case, it can transition back to itself. And you can reach the final state like this one by observing a symbol, an input symbol called, we can reuse A, doesn't matter. Okay? This is a finite state machine, which is defined in states. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4 states here. And a finite state machine, as the name implies, has a finite number of states. Okay. And then you have transitions between the states. In order to go from one state to another state, it observes the input, and it can potentially have an output corresponding to that transition. And this is a finite state machine. This is how Alan Turing theorized that all computers can be modeled this way. Does this resemble anything that you know about computers? No? Think about it. Go ahead.
Is there an infinite state machine?
Hmm?
Is there an infinite state
Nope.
machine? Okay.
Nope, because it's not theoretically possible. Okay, but if you think about it, your computer can be modeled this way. It's just the number of states that is a little bit different from what we see here. How much RAM do you have on your computer? 16 gigs, 32, okay? Is that number finite?
No. No, it's not necessarily.
It is finite. 16 gig is a finite number. Okay?
Well, you could always increase the size of your RAM.
Yeah, but the largest you can go is 128 gigabytes, so it's still
Today.
finite.
Yeah, but it's not
Today is what
infinite,
matters, though.
okay? So in terms of just RAM, okay, how many states can the computer be in? If I want to define all the different states, how many states are there just observing the amount of RAM that you have?
Quite a few.
2 to the power of 16 gig. Well, times 8 because one byte has 8 bits, right? Well, it's a huge number. Is that finite?
Yes.
Absolutely finite. Okay? Then you can say, well, but what about a hard drive? Okay, it is also a part of the state of a computer. Well, power it on. It is still finite, right? How does your computer change its state? How does the zeros and ones change from? How do you change a bit from 0 to 1? By executing instructions, right? Instruction is kind of the input.
And the output
Right.
is whatever the computer does.
The output is whatever the new state of the computer is. Okay, I'm adding 1 to this integer. Well, okay, the sum of the sum of 1 and the original value will take your machine to a new state. So it is theoretically possible to use a finite state model to represent a modern computer. It's just that you have a huge number of states. Okay. Are there any questions about what a finite state machine is? Well, is it useful in real life?
Yeah, I can see how it's possible.
Other than, I need to get past, I need to finish my computer science program so I can get a job. Is there any practical use to a finite state machine?
Well, I was just wondering, like, the states, like, is this like hardware or is this like software or both? Like, does it apply?
It's on hardware.
Oh, okay.
The states are basically the hardware states of a particular machine. Yep.
You can take a look at real world applications such as like the court of law. There's always a starting state, somebody gets arrested, and then you
Okay.
go down through the court system. Each one of those has a state, a process, something that happens.
You can describe that in the state diagram.
In the
Yes,
state diagram.
absolutely. But is there any actual use of a finite state machine just in programming itself? Okay, because I
Verification.
know, well, I just want to learn how to write programs, write games. Okay, so is there any use of finite state machine in programming?
Yeah, I guess you can check like the different states of your program itself, right?
You can model something, as a finite state machine. So for any character, you can model that character as a finite state machine, responding to incoming stuff, healing potion, and whatnot. Yep.
What if you want to run a virtual machine?
What if you want to run the virtual machine? Then you are using a finite state machine to emulate another finite state machine, which actually asks a very interesting question. Can a machine predict whether another machine can terminate? It's a termination problem. Okay, so that's what Turing worked on as a mathematician. Okay, he comes up with all these mathematical notions. But getting back to here, because I know we are running out of time, you guys are ready for lunch. Has anyone heard of regular expression?
The term, yes. The meaning, no.
Okay, so does anyone want to explain what a regular expression is and why it is useful? Or is it useful at all?
Oh, it's a meta language to, I guess,
To
use-
specify a
specify a language, or not to specify language, but it's a Oh, actually, never mind. I don't know.
Pattern matching.
But it's-
pattern matching. Very good. Okay, that's the answer. Okay, it's a pattern matching mechanism. In Windows, how do you locate a file?
Pattern matching.
Pattern matching, but can you say, I want this file name to start with this chunk of characters, with nothing in between, and then maybe these ones occurring only once, and then these reoccurring as many times as as there is?
No, you cannot.
Not in Windows, okay? But regular expression can express that sort of thing. Okay?
Only
It's really useful, and this is one reason why I use VI as an editor, because it has regular expression as a search ability. So I can now search for things not knowing the exact pattern, the exact thing. I can now specify a pattern and say, I know what I'm looking for starts with this. It has this in between occurring up to 3 times, and it has to end with this. That is regular expression. Okay? And from regular expression, where do we go? Programming languages. C, C++, Python, Perl, PHP, Visual Basic. All programming languages are expressed in a way that can be recognized not by a finite state machine, but what we call a stack machine. A stack machine is basically the same thing as a finite state machine, except what you can do with the action, with the transition, is you can push something on a stack, or you can pop something from a stack. So in addition to input and output, you have the notion of a stack. And every single programming language that we know of, that we actually use on a daily basis, can be recognized by a finite state machine with a stack. Why would that be useful?
Stacks allow for immediate data storage and retrieval.
Well, somebody has to write a compiler, right? Somebody has to write a compiler, and the person who's writing the compiler needs to understand how to translate the syntax of the programming language into the appropriate finite state machine, or stack machine in this case, so it can recognize a particular programming language and do some processing with it. And this is still kind of like a graph, okay? So all the stuff that we are going to talk about in graph theory actually has a lot of application in computer science. Are there any other questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to end today's lecture. I know I didn't quite get to the material, which is this part here, so I'll leave it up to you guys to read about it until next Tuesday, because we have an exam on Thursday.